You are going to lose consciousness completely tonight. Not metaphorically, literally. In a few hours, the you reading this sentence will vanish, and you won't even notice it happening. And that's just the first of 7 states you already cycle through, most of them every single day, without ever once being taught what any of them actually are. Here's a test. Answer honestly. Do you know what happens to you during deep sleep? Not what happens to your brain. We can see that on a scan. What happens to the part of you that's reading this right now? Where does it go for those few hours? Nobody has ever been able to answer that question with certainty. Not a single neuroscientist. Not a single philosopher. Not in the entire recorded history of human thought. We've split the atom. We've mapped the entire human genome, letter by letter. We've built machines that write poetry and diagnose cancer better than most doctors. And the one thing sitting closest to you, the fact that it feels like something to be you at all, remains completely unexplained. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. You already move through 7 distinct states of consciousness. Most of them happen every single day, on a loop, and almost nobody ever stops to notice the transition between them. One of these states you sit inside for roughly a third of your entire life, and you cannot remember a single second of actually being in it. Another one has been described by mystics, monks, and philosophers for thousands of years, in nearly identical language, across cultures that never once made contact with each other. And the last one, the 7th, is described by the people who've touched it as something that quietly rearranges everything else. How they see death, how they see other people, how they see the chair they happen to be sitting in. We are going to walk through all 7, in order, from the one you were sitting inside roughly 8 hours ago, all the way to the one almost nobody on Earth ever fully reaches. Stay until the end. Not because I'm asking you to. Because the 7th level is the one that makes you want to go back and read everything before it completely differently. The way a plot twist makes you replay the whole movie in your head. Let's start exactly where your day already starts. In the dark, with nothing, every single night, without a shred of preparation, without a countdown, without your permission, you disappear, not go somewhere quiet. Disappear. The room dissolves. Your name dissolves. The entire felt sensation of being you, of having a body, of existing in a specific place at a specific time, all of it, gone, completely, and you won't even notice it happening. Because there is no you left standing around to notice. Try this for a second. You cannot know what deep sleep actually feels like, the same way you know what darkness looks like when you shut your eyes. When you close your eyes in a dark room, there is still a witness sitting behind that darkness. Someone home, registering the black. Deep sleep has no witness at all. It isn't experiencing nothing, the way boredom is experiencing nothing. It is the total, temporary absence of an experiencer. Read that again, because it's one of the strangest facts about your own existence that you'll ever come across. And it happens to you, without fail, every single night of your life. Neuroscience gives this a clinical name, the delta wave state. Brain waves slow to below 4 cycles per second, the slowest, heaviest rhythm your brain is capable of producing. Biologically, this is when the real maintenance happens. Damaged tissue repairs itself. Hormones reset to their proper levels. The immune system does quiet, unglamorous work in the background. Short-term memories from the day get sorted, filed, and either kept or discarded, like a librarian working through the night while the building is empty. But subjectively, from the inside, if there even is an inside during this state, it is the closest thing to death that a living person will ever experience and survive. Ancient Indian philosophy has a precise word for it, sushupti. The self folding back into its own unmanifest root, the way an ocean wave rises, crashes, and forgets it was ever anything other than the ocean itself. Buddhist thought treats deep sleep as a nightly, unconscious rehearsal of nirvana, the real thing, minus the part where you're aware you're experiencing it. And yet here's the detail that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. Every single morning, you wake up already knowing that something happened overnight. Not what, just that time passed, that a gap occurred, that you were somewhere. which means some faint residual thread of awareness never actually left the building. It simply stepped all the way behind the curtain and waited there silently until it was needed again. So every single night, before anything else happens, before the dreams, before the alarm, you quietly die a small, painless death. And every single morning, without exception, without fail, for your entire life, you are resurrected into a mind that has to rebuild an entire universe from absolute scratch in under 1 second. Which is exactly, precisely, where the next level begins. The lights come back on. But not the real ones. Somewhere in that darkness, your brain begins generating an entire universe out of nothing but itself. No external light, no external sound, no raw material coming in from the outside world at all. And yet faces appear that you never consciously registered while awake. Long-dead relatives show up mid-conversation as if no time has passed. You fly over cities you've never visited. You fall from heights that don't exist. You are chased down a hallway that has no visible end, and your actual heart rate spikes, your actual palms sweat, even though your physical body hasn't moved a single muscle in the bed. This is REM sleep. Rapid eye movement, a spike in brain activity that in some ways resembles full waking consciousness, paired with a body that is essentially paralyzed on purpose, so that you don't physically act out whatever your mind is currently inventing. And here is the part that almost never gets the attention it deserves. Inside that dream, you are every single component of it, simultaneously. The stranger who insults you in the dream, that's your own mind, wearing a mask. The building you're trapped inside, with the doors that won't open, also your mind. The disembodied voice narrating your fear, warning you, threatening you. Still you, talking to yourself and somehow not recognizing your own voice. You are, at the exact same moment, the author writing the plot, the actor performing it, the architect who designed the set, and the frightened character wandering through it, fully convinced that none of it is fake. Right up until the moment you wake up. Sigmund Freud called dreams the language of the unconscious, a kind of coded message from the deeper parts of the mind that waking logic normally suppresses. Hindu philosophy has its own term for this entire state, swapna, a distorted, symbolic mirror of waking reality, built from leftover fragments of the day. Modern neuroscience prefers a quieter phrase, memory consolidation with a flair for the theatrical, the brain sorting and strengthening memories by wrapping them in strange, symbolic narrative. None of these descriptions, honestly, quite capture the sheer weirdness of the thing itself. For a few hours every single night, you fall completely for your own illusion, not skeptically, not half-heartedly, but completely, with zero exceptions, for your entire life, starting in early childhood and continuing until the day you die. And here's the question worth sitting with before we move any further. If your own brain can convince you, from the inside, that a dream is real while you are inside it, fully, viscerally, physiologically real, then what exactly is it doing right now to convince you that this moment, this sentence, this chair beneath you is any different? You open your eyes. Light floods in. Color returns. The smell of coffee drifts in from somewhere else in the house. The actual physical weight of your own body presses down into the mattress or the chair beneath you. This is what we casually call real life, the one state that almost nobody ever thinks to question, because questioning it feels, on the surface, completely absurd. Of course this is real. You can touch it. You can measure it. Other people agree it's happening. Here's why that confidence might be resting on shakier ground than it feels like. Your brain is not a camera, quietly recording the world exactly as it is. It is closer to a rendering engine, constantly guessing at an incomplete, noisy stream of raw data, and filling in the enormous gaps with assumption, prediction, and pattern matching. Billions of individual signals hit your senses every single second of every day, and your brain compresses them, edits them, discards most of them, and reconstructs a clean, coherent, three-dimensional experience out of what's left. Vision scientists have a blunt, almost uncomfortable way of putting this. You do not see the world as it actually is. You see a controlled hallucination, one that happens to line up closely enough with the outside world to keep you alive, fed and reproducing. And that phrase, closely enough, is doing an enormous amount of quiet work. Bees can see ultraviolet patterns painted onto flower petals that are completely invisible to you. Patterns that exist purely to guide the bee toward pollen. Sharks and certain migratory birds can sense the Earth's own magnetic field, using it as a built-in compass that never runs out of battery. Bats and whales build entire three-dimensional spatial maps of their environment, purely out of returning sound waves, hearing shape the way you see shape. Some humans experience a rare neurological condition called synesthesia, where hearing a piece of music produces the genuine involuntary sensation of seeing color, or where numbers arrive already tagged with a specific hue. Every single one of these is a completely different, internally consistent version of reality, constructed from a different starting set of senses. So which one, out of all of them, counts as the real one? It's a trick question. None of them are complete. And yours, the one you're currently trusting completely, isn't either. René Descartes lost actual sleep over this exact problem, wondering seriously whether he might be dreaming at this very moment, and simply have no way of knowing it from the inside. Immanuel Kant argued, centuries later, that human beings never perceive the raw world directly at all. Only a processed, filtered mental model of it, shaped by built-in cognitive structures long before it ever reaches conscious awareness. The cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman put it more bluntly than either of them. Your senses did not evolve to show you the truth. They evolved to keep you alive long enough to pass on your genes. Truth, quite simply, was never part of the job description. And yet, despite all of this, waking life still feels dramatically more solid than any dream ever does. Why? Because it's a shared hallucination, agreed upon by billions of other nervous systems at once. Another person bumps into the exact same table you do. Gravity behaves identically for everyone standing in the same room. That agreement, that quiet, constant consensus between separate minds, is really the only meaningful thing separating real life from an unusually convincing dream. Which means the actual gap between the second level and the third isn't nearly as large as it feels while you're standing inside either one of them. It's simply a version that everyone else happens to be having at the same time. For almost every single person who has ever lived, this is where the map of consciousness quietly ends. 3 states cycling endlessly, every single day, for an entire lifetime, from birth to death, and most people never once pause to ask what might be sitting underneath all 3 of them, holding them up. You're about to. Somewhere beneath waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, there exists a 4th state that refuses to fit cleanly into any of the previous 3, and almost nobody stumbles into it purely by accident. You have to go looking for it deliberately, often for years, before it opens up. Picture the deepest possible point of sustained meditation. The body sits completely still. The senses are technically still switched on. Sound still reaches the ears. Light still reaches the eyes. But something else entirely has happened underneath all of that. Thought itself has gone quiet. Not quieter. Gone. There is still awareness present. But there is nothing left remaining for that awareness to actually be aware of, except itself, sitting alone in its own stillness. This is transcendental consciousness. Awareness that has folded all the way back on itself, resting directly on its own source, with nothing left in between to distract it. Here is where things get genuinely interesting for the skeptics in the room. This isn't purely a mystical claim resting on faith. It shows up, measurably, on an EEG. In advanced long-term meditators, brain hemispheres that normally fire somewhat independently, somewhat chaotically, especially during ordinary distracted waking life, begin to synchronize with each other. Left and right hemisphere, frontal and posterior regions, all of it locking into a shared, coherent rhythm, almost like a room full of separate instruments that suddenly, without being told to, start playing the exact same note. As the inner mental noise drops away, the brain's own electrical chaos appears to drop away right alongside it. The ancient Upanishads gave this state its own precise name, Turiya, literally the 4th. Sitting quietly behind the 3 familiar states that everyone already knows without effort. Buddhist philosophy calls a version of this emptiness. Not because nothing at all is present, but specifically because whatever is present no longer has any edges, any boundary separating it from anything else. Descartes built his entire philosophical system on a single foundational claim: I think, therefore I am. This fourth state is the strange quiet discovery that even when the thinking fully and completely stops, the I am doesn't go anywhere at all. It was never actually the thinking itself in the first place. It was always the open space in which the thinking happened to be occurring. People who genuinely reach this state, across wildly different cultures and centuries, keep describing it using almost identical language, like finally coming home to a place they never consciously remember leaving in the first place. Not a physical location, a condition of being. As if the mind had spent its entire existence facing outward, endlessly searching the world for some final piece of meaning, only to turn fully around and discover that the one doing all that searching was, itself, the very thing being searched for all along. This is also, quietly, the exact point where things stop being fully measurable by outside instruments. An EEG machine can show you coherence, synchrony, a clean readable pattern on a screen. It cannot show you what that coherence actually feels like from the inside, in the first person, to the one experiencing it. From here forward, we've moved past the comfortable edge of what neuroscience can confidently describe, and into territory that only philosophy, direct testimony, and lived experience can even begin to map. The fourth level tends to fade the moment your eyes open again and ordinary life resumes, at least for most people who ever touch it. But for a much smaller number, something shifts permanently. The stillness simply stops switching off. This is cosmic consciousness, the point where deep inner silence and full outer activity run at exactly the same time, instead of politely taking turns the way they normally do. You can hold an entire conversation. You can feel real joy. You can feel real grief. You can get cut off in traffic and feel your own blood pressure spike in irritation. And underneath every single bit of that, completely undisturbed by any of it, something is simply quietly watching the whole thing unfold, not detached in some cold, indifferent way. Detached the way the open sky remains detached from whatever weather happens to be passing through it that day. There does appear to be a real, measurable, neurological correlate here as well. Sustained activation in the brain's frontal monitoring networks, tracking internal experience and external experience at the very same moment, continuously, rather than switching back and forth between them. A measurable physiological balance between bodily alertness and mental calm that's genuinely rare to find occurring together in the same nervous system. But once again, the instruments can only chart the shadow that this state casts. They cannot record the actual felt quality of the thing itself. The Upanishads describe this level as the direct, lived recognition that you are not, in fact, your thoughts, your emotions, or your personality, that all three of those are simply things happening within a larger awareness, rather than being that awareness itself. You don't lose your individual personality here. You don't stop having preferences, quirks, a sense of humor. You simply stop mistaking that personality for the entire truth of what you are. Pain does not vanish at this level. Loss does not vanish. Grief, disappointment, frustration, none of it disappears. But none of it is able to fully consume the one experiencing it anymore, because there is now a steady, unmoving vantage point sitting quietly behind the entire storm, watching it pass through without being swept away by the current. Mystics across wildly unrelated traditions, separated by oceans, centuries, and languages that share no common root, all independently call this the witness state, the first genuinely stable foothold of what many traditions describe as enlightenment. Not a single blinding flash of light, a slow, permanent shift in exactly where you happen to be standing relative to your own experience. And once that witness fully stabilizes, something even stranger starts to happen next. The line separating the quiet awareness sitting inside me and whatever intelligence is running the entire universe begins, very slowly, to blur. At the level before this one, you watch the world unfold from a quiet, comfortable distance. Now that distance itself begins to close, not because the witness disappears, but because the witness itself starts to feel everything it's watching, rather than simply observing it from behind glass. This is God consciousness. The world stops looking like a collection of separate, inert objects sitting around you and starts feeling completely saturated with presence everywhere you look. The tree outside your window stops being background scenery. It feels genuinely alive, not as a poetic metaphor you're choosing to apply to it, but as a direct felt quality baked into the perception itself. The boundary separating the one looking and the thing being looked at grows steadily thinner, gradually replaced by something very close to reverence or quiet awe. Neuroscientists, studying advanced meditators during states of deep compassion or genuine awe, have observed highly synchronized gamma wave activity across the brain, alongside a noticeable blending between the brain's emotional processing centers and its sensory processing center. Almost as if perception and feeling stop traveling down two separate channels and start arriving together, fused into a single unified signal. But once again, the machine can only log the pattern on the graph. It cannot log what any of it actually means to the person inside the experience. Every major spiritual tradition on record has its own name for this exact territory. The ancient Vedic texts describe it as Sat Chit Ananda, being, consciousness, and bliss, arising together as a single unified thing, rather than three separate qualities stitched together. Christian mystics throughout history called it theosis, a genuine union with the divine achieved through love rather than through doctrine or ritual alone. Sufi poets wrote at length about Ishq, a burning, consuming love that gradually dissolves the entire sense of being separate from what you love. Different centuries, different continents, different vocabularies entirely, yet somehow arriving at the same reported experience. The universe quietly stops feeling like a cold, indifferent mechanism and starts feeling like something genuinely intelligent, aware, and, almost impossibly, given everything painful in the world, fundamentally good. At this level, love itself stops being one particular emotion among many that you occasionally feel and instead becomes an entire way of perceiving, a lens you're looking through rather than a passing feeling that arrives and fades. You don't simply feel love directed toward the world anymore. You begin to see straight through love, and everything your eyes land on starts to carry the same quality you once reserved only for the small handful of people closest to you. There is one level left after this one, and it happens to be the level where even this, the last remaining faint sense of me over here feeling connected to it over there, quietly dissolves as well. At this final level, the witness itself dissolves completely, not into nothingness, but into everything at once. All boundaries removed. There is no longer a separate you standing off to the side, observing the universe with love and reverence. Because the very separation that made you and the universe into two distinct things has fully, completely collapsed. What remains isn't emptiness or absence. It's presence with absolutely no edges left anywhere. Consciousness itself, infinite and self-aware, with no remaining center standing apart from it that could even call any part of it mine. Even language itself begins to strain and break down at this point, because language was built, from the ground up, by separate selves, for the specific purpose of communicating with other separate selves. Modern neuroscience has coined a term for the closest measurable neighbor to this state: non-dual awareness, marked by a near-total drop in the brain's self-referential processing activity, the exact regions that normally maintain the constant background sense of me, quieting down almost entirely. But that, again, is only a description of the shadow this state casts onto a screen. It is not a description of the thing itself. Vedanta calls this the direct, unmediated realization of Brahman, one single reality, without any second thing standing apart from it, somehow appearing as absolutely everything at the same time. Mahayana Buddhism calls a version of this shunyata, an emptiness that is paradoxically completely and totally full. Mystics from entirely unconnected traditions, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, keep independently landing on the exact same impossible image to describe it. A single drop of water that becomes the entire ocean, and yet somehow remains a single drop. Time itself is reported to behave differently here as well, according to every account left behind by those who claim to have touched it. Past and future stop functioning as two separate destinations you travel between, and instead collapse into a single, complete, boundless present that somehow contains every moment simultaneously, and the search that quietly drove every single level before this one. The search for meaning, for God, for truth, for lasting peace simply ends. Not because the search fails or runs out of road, because the one doing all that searching turns out to be the exact same thing that was being searched for the entire time. So here's the question worth sitting with, now that we've walked all the way through 7 levels. Deep sleep, where the self vanishes completely every single night without exception. Dreaming, where you construct entire worlds out of nothing, and then completely forget you were the one who built them. Waking life, the shared hallucination solid enough and convincing enough to fool nearly everyone forever, without a single day off. Transcendence, the level where the constant background noise of thought finally goes quiet. The witness that stops disappearing once it's found. The world that suddenly starts to feel genuinely alive underneath your feet. And unity, the level where it turns out there was never anyone truly separate to begin with. Look at that entire list again. All 7 laid out side by side. It doesn't actually read like 7 completely different things happening to 7 different people. It reads like one single thing, wearing 7 different masks in sequence, moving steadily from being completely unaware of awareness itself, all the way to being aware of nothing whatsoever except awareness. Which means the very question we opened with, why does it feel like anything to be you might have been slightly off from the very beginning? Maybe consciousness was never something you have. Tucked away quietly somewhere inside your skull, patiently waiting for the right fMRI study to finally explain it away. Maybe it's the one single thing that was never actually missing in the first place. Maybe it's simply been looking out through your eyes this entire time, from the very first moment you opened them as a child, all the way through to this exact sentence. And tonight, when you finally fall asleep, it's going to do exactly what it does every single night of your life, without exception. Disappear completely, entirely, without a trace, and come back again tomorrow morning, absolutely certain, the way it always is, that it never actually left at all.